По-моєму, тут трошки заводиться. Дякую. Ми продовжуємо в...
We continue the discussion of the state budget of Ukraine. We invite the representatives of different ministries and independent experts in economy in order to see what is envisaged by Budget 2017. There were many political discussions, and now we try to find logic in the Budget 2017 and to explain it to society. We would like to hear to Stepan Kubiv, Glib Vyshlinskyi, Deputy Minister, and Glib Vyshlinskyi, and Taras Kachka, Deputy Executive Director, International Renaissance Foundation. So firstly, I would like to hear from you several words, presentation. What is, in your opinion, good or not so good? What works in this budget 2017? Because we heard the declaration of the previous government that was the survival budget, and this will be the budget for development, and then we will hear the assessment of experts. Dear colleagues, good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank for this great interest to the discussion of the budget, and I believe that this is correct, that the budget is presented timely, and the agenda was written coming out of the understanding of the problem by specialists in legislation, informing local and state budgets, and now we have the opportunity to discuss and to assess the budget and analyze it. I would like to say about two opinions. What did the budget stimulate the development of economy in 2017? And second, that we should have main instruments that stimulate this development of economy, because the figures would be considered in the parliament and by expert community, and this will bring different benefits and drawbacks of the problem. But if you see slide number 2, the main forecast indicators envisaged by 2017, they are discussed in expert communities, and they also come out of the main documents that Ukraine signed, its obligations, I mean with financial institutions, and I would like to say that I informed about the submission of the budget and the main macro indicators that were taken into account in the budget 2017, and I was for 2 days in Brussels. I met with several European commissioners, and I presented this in my reports, and I met with monitoring groups of the deputies, and there we presented this position concerning understanding where we are going to. Second important issue I would like to raise about macroeconomic indicators. We are speaking about stabilization, macro stabilization. The Prime Minister spoke about it, about balanced budget, also mentioned by the Prime Minister, the main priorities that we identified, that were voiced yesterday at the meeting of the government, where Vladimir Groisman said at what level of development of adoption of the budget we are at the moment. When we speak about the position of inflation character, we are speaking about 8.1%. We are speaking about the priorities, and we see them in the sphere of social aspects. There's education. We are speaking about medical care fund for construction road. It's 14.2 billion. And also social priorities we envisage in prospect, and the prospect depends on the development of production and enterprises. And I would like to focus the attention on the macroeconomic indicators and forecast for 2017. You can see this information on the slide. I won't comment on this, and export is really important for us. And when we are speaking about attraction of investment, it is also of importance, and also the rise of inflation. The level of unemployment is 8.7%. Why we took this indicator? It is that when we are speaking about the development of production and investment, we are speaking about the creation of additional working places. When we are speaking about macrofinancial health and stability, I would say that the most important is to get tranche from IMF. These funds are provided for gold reserve, and this is a signal of implementing the reforms and the development, implementing the program of government that was adopted by the Supreme Council of Ukraine. We want to say that macro indicators that we proposed for 2017, the government correspondingly adopted the indicators at its meeting for 3 years, and they were submitted to the platforms of the cabinet of to the committees of the cabinet of ministers, and we can forecast the development of production and development of and the attraction of investment that stimulate the development of the economy. So on the next slide, I would like to show where we see the main instruments that stimulate economic development. First, these are budget instruments. I said macro financial stability investment projects, level of opportunities, and state procurement. And at the meeting of the ministerial group headed by two Euro commissioners at Brussels, in Brussels, there was an issue of e-economy and the participation of Ukraine as leading country in IT area. The issue of Prozoro and state procurement was cited as an example for European continent. There were participants from 28 countries, and they said that this is our leading project, and also non-budget instruments deregulation, and also effectiveness of state enterprises. These instruments and the figures I've mentioned, they were presented by at the Ministry of Economy and Trade. Also, we discussed it with the members of association who are responsible for different areas of production, and also as the result, as these instruments will be based on organization and technology, and to get results that will be connected with the effective use of state funds. At the same time, I would like to say that State Budget 2017 should provide strengths and to develop state enterprises, to create new working places, and also the issue of privatization of state enterprises is important. The program is implemented according to the plan, and the rest of the issues that will be discussed here will be provided by my colleagues. Also 5% and 28 million, these are for defense sphere. Thank you very much, and now I give the floor to Rybochenko. You mentioned the issues of defense. So the majority of people see that the money are taken away from economy for the defense. So we don't have enough resources in order to develop economy, because we spend a lot for defense. But can the expenditures for defense sphere influence the economy positively?
Yes, Mr. Kubiv mentioned that the defense expenses amount to 130 billion hryvnia, and we should understand that almost all this money will be directed to the local businesses and local enterprises. We think that this will become big impetus for development of local local military sector enterprises and to satisfy our defense demands at a proper level. Maybe these are not enough. This is not a huge amount of money, but this is for the first time when 5% of GDP are directed to the defense sphere. This will be directed to Держоборонпром, to the state company dealing with defense issues and other agencies in this area. Now, Mr. Vyshlinskyi, would you please comment whether money allocated for economic development are sufficient in the draft budget, and from the long-term development, long-term growth point of view, whether it allows us to ensure this growth. If you try to approach to this issue from state-of-the-art point of view, we should look at IMF papers. The leading analysts from IMF last month produced a paper observing that in the developed countries the growth rates are slowing down currently, and the interest rates are dropping everywhere. So we should find out how to develop the world economy. And looking at economic growth, the IMF experts suggest that state investments considerably influence the GDP growth, and the state consumption also can stimulate the GDP growth when the state buys something that is public procurement, social payments and social transfers are important for the economy development. That is, these all are things at which we look as social consumption. But nevertheless, the most important are social payments to the most vulnerable groups. This money are the least outflowing money. They are usually reinvested into the domestic economy. Why in Ukraine for the long time the attitude to the state investments had remained rather skeptical, because it is the most easier way to stole public money from investment projects than to stole public money allocated for pensions. That's the reason why we so skeptically assessed the investment projects. The IMF shows that we are in 130th position out of 150 in terms of corruption. So this has some grounds. Due to Prozora system, public procurement became more transparent, and we believe that very soon we will find another ways to make public procurement more transparent. Also, there are some ways to do this, and gradually with successful removal of corruption obstacles. We will make state or public investment more popular in this country. On the other hand, we should understand that the benefits from social investments will be higher than the cost of the borrowed capital which we attract in order to finance that social investments. So when we look on state investments or public investments, we should very carefully select the projects. Nevertheless, we have a good source of cheap money like EBRD, the World Bank, IMF, IFC. I think that in terms of road construction, we may allocate rather modest investments on behalf of the state and involve a lot of investments from, for example, international financial institutions, and this will be for the benefit of Ukrainian people. Also, this would allow to control public procurement because it will be automatically carried out on the under the supervision of international institutions. When we look at the draft budget, which is submitted to the Parliament, the development or the growth expenditures are very small, and when we look more carefully on the spending items, we clearly understand that housing construction for the servicemen could not be seen as investment development. Recently, at the German-Ukrainian Business Forum, I saw complaint on TV. I saw complaints of German businesses on non-supply of the particles and parts which are needed because there is a huge shortcomings and shortages in the wagons in Ukrainian railway company. The same complaints we hear from metallurgy, from chemical sector, etc. Also, the biggest problem is that in northern direction, our cargo flows dropped almost to zero, and we should pay attention on the western direction of export, southern direction of export, etc. Speaking about state investments, 1 billion hryvnia. Which are in the healthcare, social sphere, transportation sphere, and environmental protection. The roads, 14% and 27 billion we will attract from international structures, and we have very clear principles upon which we will base our state investment projects. And actually, what Glib mentioned, that now we are transferring from the Soviet market to the international market, which entails competition and modernization. Just before coming here, we had a sitting of the National Committee on Industrial Development of Ukraine. We had established this committee and coordinated The membership next week will discuss the major directions for Ukraine's industry's development. The issues which we discussed today, they are unpredictable, they are very complicated. When we speak about the modernization of the rolling stock of our railway station, we should understand that it's impossible to change it overnight. It requires huge investments. 70% we will try to modernize, and 30% will be transferred to PPP project, and this will be new form for us. And as for international financial institutions, I agree that no businesses can borrow with an interest rate of 22%. These are credits and loans which would never be repaid. With the current level of inflation, it's impossible. The Prime Minister clearly said that we have to consolidate efforts and create and open doors for big investors and to increase export. These are two interrelated things. But what you mentioned about recommendations, this requires a lot of reforming and new laws to be passed in Verkhovna Rada at 4 p.m. Today we will be at the Verkhovna Rada and we will discuss the budget. Okay, I would like to invite now Taras Kachka to comment on this issue in media. Will you please develop more? Is it possible to pass this through the parliament? Of course, each MP will try to protect their own regions and to get more for their regions. But now I think that the most loudly, the Mr. Halasyuk, head of the Industrial Committee in Verkhovna Rada, who tries to prove that our European countries do the biggest strategic investments into the fund of state strategic projects. But this does not mean that Ukraine should do the same now. When we look at the investment policy of the European Union now, we could see that state investments are one pillar. The second are structural reforms, the second pillar structural reform, and the structural reforms are very important. In 2014-2015, we have passed many reforming laws, and now we have to implement these laws. We have to provide considerable funding for survival of that laws. This is true not only in terms of our defense sector. Well, that's also true for the healthcare, educational spheres. So the Prime Minister had stated that reforms have to be financed. The third pillar of good investments is macroeconomic stability, and which actually means controlling the budget deficit. Now we have the expert in business consensus that we need more stable, more stable inflation rate than cutting down the taxes. I think that everybody understands that macrofinancial stabilization is much more important for the economy than cutting down tax rates. Nevertheless, here I agree with Glib that looking at Greece, where budget discipline and continuous cutting down of expenses was continuously criticized by society and resulted in stagnation of the economy. So big expenses from the budget sometimes are promotion of growth. So this is the issue of personal taste. Who prefers more liberal policy, economic policy, or more Keynesian economic policy? So these are two extremes that govern all the ideas coming from MPs and politicians. As for reform, I agree that they require resources, a lot of effort and time. Decentralization, deregulation, these are right ways to go. But they also entail not only the issue of resources, the issues of money, but also the issues of human resources, etc. As for European policy, we have to comply with the European standards in terms of policy in general. We have the roadmap for our fiscal legislation. For the first time, this year budget is honest. It shows expenses and revenues. The Prime Minister stated that the draft budget is subject for discussion, and we have opened this discussion with the Parliament. Also, we keep the door open for discussions with the European institutions and Parliament. Yesterday, with Belgium, in Belgium, the budget is passed not easily. And 3 days ago, they finally managed to pass their budget, which was not easy. The only thing which I would like to say, in case the budget is transparent, is well balanced, and people will see that the money is spent transparently, then this will revive trust to the authorities. There is a high risk, the lack of trust, and that's why we have loan money. Thank you to all the experts. We have 20 minutes more. Maybe you have questions. You wish to comment. This is the Center for. This year budget is distinguished in a way that it is public and that it is offered for discussion. When there are investments to the state sector, I do not think that that's not right. way to go. I think PPP is the right right way. It will allow the companies to take on them part of the state responsibilities. Currently, the draft budget is being discussed by all the actors, stakeholders. We all realize that we are facing considerable challenges. The economy at the global level and the economy inside the country are in a very critical situation. We have to overcome poverty. This is our main objective. With the resources that we have, I hope that if we continue to be thus that open and that fair in distribution of powers between the state and private sector, then we will be successful. Now about the topic of our briefing. I have a question. Whether state enterprises could be managers of their money, whether they can distribute their dividends, or whether they can use the dividends, etc. There is almost 6 months from the moment when I became first vice prime minister. And for the first time, I asked myself about the problems of the state sector. We have more than 3,700 state enterprises, and their share in GDP is the least. Their contribution to GDP, the least. When there were no modernization of those enterprises. Without modernization, we are unable to produce competitive products. And in result of all that that I mentioned, the dollar exchange rate had grown 3 times. The import substitution at domestic market is rather ineffective. We have Olena Salenko here, who is an expert how to in this area. We decided that we need to modernize state enterprises and have efficient managers. Otherwise, we have to destroy them, to liquidate them. Now we are carrying out the auditing or inventory of state enterprises. There are some state enterprises which are related to the defense sector. We should take the most efficient, and others enterprises should be privatized or become objects of PPP, and allow investors to come to those enterprises, even investors from the West. And finally, we will see quality owners, quality managers, quality modernization, and quality products. Unfortunately, as of today, we do not have modernized and competitive state enterprises which could compete at the international and domestic market. About benefits of state enterprises. Those who had to remain in state ownership, that enterprises have to be they have to be able to dispose their money. They should not be the instrument, the tools of state policy. One of the biggest problems of the state enterprises in Ukraine was the problem that we always mix together the state business, state enterprises, the business of that enterprises, and social function of that enterprises. Okay, would the management dispose the benefits? No, there are many supervisory boards or and those supervisory boards would include independent members with the enterprises with good investment plans will invest and get more income, and more income. If there is no good investment plan, then the Ministry of Finance, represented in the supervisory board, may say that, well, you have no good investment plan. You can just surrender some of your assets to the state and reallocate something for subsidies. But we will step back from the practice that we take all the income, all the profit from the state enterprises. Next week, the Prime Minister will have a special discussion about state companies. Today in the morning, we discussed the supervisory board members for state enterprises, and we really believe that the openness of supervisory boards will allow us to reload the work of state enterprises. When we speak about state enterprises, quite often we understand that these very enterprises which are responsible for the development of infrastructure. These are like Ukrposhta, like seaports administration, like Ukrainian railroads, etc. They can change our country. We have time for one more question. Natalka Prutka, Lovecom publication. A question to Mr. Kubiv. Could you please develop more what the government plans to do to use the reserve of internal investments? Once I wrote an article, Viktor Yushchenko said that devaluation of hryvnia was a mistake. Instead of involving hryvnia into domestic investments, $15 billion are annually withdrawn to offshores, and we have $100 billion kept somewhere. The statement number one, I read your article and I agree with many statements of it. I can dispute about figures, but I agree in a major point that there is a lack of trust. In order to revive that trust, we have to change many things, and I remind about Prozora system. When there are accents which are bankrupt, you can bring them on Prozora and open auction and offer these bankrupt assets for sale. The impossibility to turn the valuation back with the assistance of import substitution, that's impossible. I would sum up the following: if in this year budget and for the next 3 years, we will remain open. We won't be afraid of discussions in all the aspects. We'll be able to revive trust. Reviving trust means bringing money back. 450 billion hryvnia circulate in hands, not in the economy. But we have to do a number of steps which are now in the responsibility of electronic declarations, National Anti-Corruption Bureau, law enforcement agencies, prosecutor's office, etc. The anti-corruption work should not be selective, but should be total and understandable. Either you fill in electronic declaration or you do not fill. This will result in some specific results. Thank you very much for discussion. Thank you for coming.